What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Ezra Fishman, VP of Growth at Wistia. Ezra started his career as an engineer developing devices to help treat diabetes and obesity at GI Dynamics. He later had a short stint as an operations manager at an investment firm that was dedicated to funding health tech startups. After completing his MBA, Ezra joined a video tech startup called Wistia as their director of marketing, and after 4 years, he transitioned to leading business intelligence. And today, Ezra is VP of Growth at Wistia, where he's now spent over 12 years, seeing the company grow from a handful of customers to over 375,000 customers and becoming one of the top VPaaS tools on the planet. Ezra, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with, as your journey in Wistia. So as Wistia's first customer and then later on as an early team member, you've seen the company from both sides of the lens. What was your aha moment when you realized you needed to switch from being a client to actually joining the team? And once inside, did you have a moment of revelation or a bold move that completely flipped the script on how Wistia operated or approached its business strategy?
Yeah, solid questions. The origin story, my origin story for Wistia is an interesting one. So Wistia is founded Chris Savage and Brendan Schwartz. They were actually both good friends of mine. So we were all living together in Boston when they quit their jobs and said, "Hey, we're going to go start a company. We don't know what it's about. We don't know what it's going to do, but we're going to start a company." And I said, I was working medical devices. I said, "Good luck, Godspeed." They came back after a few months and were like, "We're going to do something with video. We don't know what it is." Or they were thinking around thinking about artists and people that need portfolio sites. And we were sitting around talking and being like, there's not a lot of money in artists aren't tend to spend a ton of money. And I was working at this company and we were doing medical procedures. We were doing endoscopic procedures. Endoscopic procedures all end up with video at the end because you have the endoscope that creates video. And so we were doing these procedures all over the world and mailing DVDs around the world to the different doctors that needed to watch the video, the recordings and share their feedback. And so we were sitting around one day and I was like, "Hey, Brendan, could you do something here that would just make this easier? And this company will pay you money for it and real money for it tomorrow if you can help us fix this." And he was like, "Oh yeah, that's easy. That's no problem at all." And that was how Wistia was born. Wistia kind of was born out of that, became a private video sharing and collaboration platform. GI Dynamics was customer number one. I brought them into the office and we had a meeting with my boss, and this was another startup. And they were like, "Hey, instead of mailing these DVDs around, what if we could just upload them and have the doctors comment on the website?" And it was like, "You mean like YouTube?" She was like, "Yeah, but not on YouTube. These are surgery procedures. Maybe it'll be private." And yeah, so that's where Wistia is born. The company, the Wistia, found some more customers kind of in that vein, some medical device companies, some people that were, production houses that wanted to do, share their proofs of videos and kind of give feedback, not put it out in the wild. And kind of that's how it all began. I went to business school. It was 5 years before I finished business school. Just went to get lunch with Chris and Brendan. I was like, "Hey, how's Wistia doing?" They were asking me, what are you doing next, Ezra? And I was like, "I don't know. I'm gonna find something probably in the healthcare space. That's where I was interested in." And yeah, we started talking, and they were like, "Well, we're at an interesting place now. We think we're finally getting some momentum, and we could use some help on the marketing side. Would you be interested in that?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know anything about marketing. You don't know anything about running a company. Our powers combined, this will probably be great." And so then I joined Wistia, and we made a pivot to focusing less on the internal private video and more on putting video out onto your website, video embeds, tracking the performance. And I would say that was the pivotal shift in the Wistia journey, was from kind of this private internal tool to use video for marketing, put it on your website, track how it's performing. And kind of shortly thereafter, obviously because I had joined, we started to grow a lot. So we unlocked kind of customer growth, and got a free plan out the door, kind of just started to get, tons more users, tons more people on the platform. And then the company is, we are not a VC backed firm. We're not like go big or go home. It's been a, slow, steady rise. But yeah, now we're lots of customers, lots of users. We're a big company now. We're over 200 people. That's huge.
Such a cool story. Yeah, I feel like 200 people probably feels massive compared to the early days. So like you were an employee, what, like less than 10?
6 or 7.
Nice. Very cool. Such a cool story. I feel like I heard pieces of that from listening to some of the different co-founders. I know they're big on like other video podcasts, and I checked out the podcast series that Wistia does as well. Such an amazing production ourselves on our side. We have a lot to learn from you guys there, but we joked before recording that you're pretty dark on the socials, and usually for our interviews we go deep on social research and poke questions about some of the posts that our guests made. That was a bit hard for us to do for you, but on the plus side, you've written a ton for Wistia on their blog, and there's one article I wanted to start by poking you about. I read through it, and I guess it felt like prophetic in a sense. You called it Beyond Funnel Vision. In the article, you advocate for this idea of focusing on building an audience rather than just capturing leads, way before this became the norm for many companies. I feel like some folks listening right now might just be like, yeah, well, obviously, like that's core to marketing. You want to build an audience, but 12 years ago, that was crazy. It was a crazy idea. Like I remember it started my career 12 years ago, and this idea of like capturing leads and having gated content everywhere, like that was the goal of B2B, right? So how were you able to foresee the shift in marketing focus, and what influenced your early realization that there was a huge importance in building an audience first before capturing leads?
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about the shift, but there's a lot of people that are still on that other side of the shift. True. There's a lot of marketers out there that are, and a lot of CEOs that are asking their marketing team, well, how many qualified leads did you get this month? And, forget this audience stuff. That's BS. So yeah. I mean, for us, it was seeing what was working for us at Wistia. And what we were finding was, we were making content, in the early days, making a lot of content about how to create video, how to use video kind of more effectively, how to create video on a budget. And we were getting lots of engagement, lots of people that were, commenting on blog posts, commenting on Twitter, really just kind of engaging with the brand. And then they were telling other people about the product, and it was kind of spreading, and we could see, it's hard to measure that behavior, but we could see when we put out content, we could actually see the number of website visits and the number of signups go up in the days following that. We couldn't say like, hey, George over there shared it, but we could see that behavior happening. And then when we started to kind of lock things down and say like, hey, you have to put in your email to get access to anything, just the number of people engaging with our content went way down. And, the trade-off just started to become pretty obvious to us of like, hey, just get more people engaging more deeply. And it put pressure on, the content has to be good, because it's not about getting like people to download one thing and then pestering them with sales. It's like, you got to create good stuff that then they want to consume another thing and then another thing, and they want to opt into that and then start telling other people about the company. And so it became clear it was, a quality game, more than a quantity game. And that was like another thing that was like, I think, controversial at that time. I mean, I remember having conversations on the marketing team being like, hey, it's not about putting out 30 more blog posts this month. There's an element to that. There's an element to, ranking in search and being relevant. But quality's just much more important. And yeah, that's how we started to just picture our audience as like this behemoth thing that we were growing and we were really, trying to get fans. And that really started to shift how we approached marketing.
I feel like there's a lesson here. Good marketing metrics can make good marketers do really bad things at times. And your own career growth at Wistia, I've actually find very fascinating, from director of marketing to director and VP of business intelligence to your current role of VP of growth. So you understand the data picture inside and out, no doubt. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb here in saying that you probably put a lot of stock in data, but just based on that last question and response, it feels like you also put a lot of stock into the qualitative elements of marketing and building quality, engagements with your audience, not just measuring everything to grow. So maybe walk us a little bit about how your tenure in business intelligence helped you prepare you for your role as VP of growth at Wistia.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that have had different roles, worn different kind of responsibilities, worn different hats, but also it's like a lot of the same stuff. Marketing, BI, growth. There's a lot of overlap in those circles of kind of, how are we attracting people? How are we converting them? How are we using data to make better decisions? I think I joke about kind of I'm a data guy. I like data. I'm comfortable with data. I like using data, but I'm also a data skeptic. I've seen all the ways that data has failed, data's not the holy grail for me. It is a useful tool. It is a useful input to decisions, but people have to make decisions. I think at times people fall in love with data and, say like, oh, the data is going to tell me what to do. And, I think that's bullshit. You're not going to be very successful. I think if that is your mantra, talk a little bit about like data informed decision-making rather than data driven. I think data can tell you a lot of things. But it also is not going to reveal the answers. We talk a lot about, I think there's a tendency when you've got a problem to say, well, let's go collect all of the data and like, let's go on a, collect all the books for this research project, collect all the data and see what the answer is. That my experience is like, tends to be wild goose chases. You're just kind of collecting, looking for patterns. You can convince yourself of almost any pattern. I am a much bigger believer in taking action or having a hypothesis and saying, hey, does the data prove or disprove that? So I believe that our best customers spend only a little bit of time on the website. Because I've talked to a handful of customers and they're not interested in doing a bunch of research online. They want to get right into the product and start using it. So I've got some intuition about that. I have this belief. I can go use data now to test that and to say like, hey, is that right? Is that wrong? Which sets of customers is that right? It's never going to be right or wrong completely. There's always going to be like a little bit of both. But you can go use that and test. And like test that hypothesis. You can, put some out in the world and test that hypothesis. And that's how I see kind of the most effective use of data is when you have like a specific question that you're trying to answer, a specific thing that you can kind of say like yes or no, or kind of in which case is this true? And kind of at the root of your question is, can you misuse data? And yes, I think that is honestly more common than using data, I think, effectively is misusing data.
It's pretty fascinating. I was employee number 8 at a business intelligence and dashboarding company, and grew up very much like the messaging around data driven and all of this. So actually what you're saying really resonates quite a bit from my own kind of my real world experience working with customers who do deploy dashboard and BI in their company. And probably my number one takeaway from my tenure in that company was that unlocking the value of data is really about that human connection. You can build all the cool dashboards and reports and analytics at the end of the day. It's really about being able to use this information and communicate it to the humans who are making decisions. Talk to us, and you kind of touched on this, but I'd like you to talk us through a little bit of the soft skills required to work with data and have your organization be data informed. Because I don't think you're saying, don't look at the data. You're saying, make really good decisions, but use the data to back it up. Just don't rely extensively on it. So maybe you can talk us a little bit about the soft skills around this.
Yeah. I think there's a ton of soft skills. I think it starts at the very beginning with just like trying to understand what people are hoping to learn, what they're trying to get from the data. All the time. This is like, I think, very similar to like the classic like product manager role of like, well, customers are saying this thing, but what are they really saying? And so the same thing applies with data, with BI, with kind of market data. The ask from the internal customer is, can I have a dashboard that tells me this, and this? And it's like a long list of things. But the real challenge is like, well, what are you actually trying to find out? What is the question that you have? What are you looking for input on? And then the answer to that is often related, similar to what you asked for, but not exactly what you asked for. Hey, we can get you the data, but it's not going to tell you exactly what you're going to look for, what you're expecting. And I would say like a classic example of this is we're often looking at distributions of behavior at Wistia. And so how long does it take people to purchase? How long does it take them to upload their first video? How many videos do people upload when they start uploading video? And kind of questions like this. And what we found is, I can tell you what the distribution is going to look like without doing any work. Is, there's this same pattern of kind of exponential decay where most people are going to do nothing at all. A few people are going to upload one video. A few other people are going to upload 2, 3, and then on down the line. And doesn't matter what the behavior or the question is, that's what the distribution is going to look like. So if you just want the distribution, I can already tell you what it's going to be. There's like another question behind that is like, what are the outliers doing? What does it take for people to be motivated enough to upload 2 or 3 videos? And those things the data is not going to necessarily tell you, or the simple distribution's not going to tell you. Or the other fun one that everyone loves to ask is like, what's that magic number? That magic number, how many pages of the website does someone have to look at before they're going to convert? How many uploads do they have to do before they're going to become a long-term customer? Blah, blah. Also BS. There's no magic number. There's going to be a distribution. The magic number is for ease of communication, for telling the story internally so that we can all remember it. Mm-hmm. That's what the magic number is. The people that upload 2 videos, people that upload 3 are going to be better than those. People that upload 4 are going to be better than those. 5 is going to be better than those. We make up these stories of kind of magic numbers, magic things to give ourselves something to run after, and to make the world simpler. And again, it's not, it's not to say that there aren't at times like differences in the data where like the difference between inviting 5 friends and 6 friends is meaningful and there's something there. Sometimes there is, but it's never a black and white that's like, well, 5 is great, 6 is meaningless, 4 is meaningless. that is not. I've never seen that to be the case.
Yeah, definitely not black or white. It makes me think of some of the conversations we've had around PQLs, like product qualified leads, with this whole shift with like product led marketing. Like everyone needs to drive to this number. Like I forget what the one was for Slack, like number of team members invited. Like it's like our North Star. Like we get to that number and we're good for that person. Like it's obvious a distribution. So I like how you broke that down and totally agree. I want to ask you, like, what other growth metrics are kind of top of mind for you when I ask you, like, what are the most misunderstood growth metrics? And you've written a lot about LTV to CAC and payback period. Like, just curious your take there.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many there.
We could have our own podcast episode about that.
Yeah. I think if you zoom out a ton, this is like the fun magic numbers, like this rule of 40 business metric of like, hey, what is your growth rate? What is your EBITDA? And there's something magical about 40. That's not true. There isn't anything magical about 40. It's a range. It's a distribution. It's a nice round number, which again is helpful. I'm not disputing that. Like a sense of like gray and ranges is like hard to understand. But I think if we acknowledge that part of it and say, oh, here's how we're simplifying it, then I think we're being more intellectually honest, and like it's easier to know that like 38 is also just as good as 40. There's nothing magical. I think like LTV, CAC are like nice ratios. Nice, again, this like magical 3-to-1 ratio is not really magical. About 3-to-1. CAC is like really messy. Every single organization I've seen measures it differently. Mm-hmm. What things do they throw in the bucket versus what things don't they? I think that is really hard and challenging. A thing that we've used, which I think is like a little bit unusual, not unusual. We are a SaaS business, and we talk a lot about kind of monthly active users, weekly active users, and those things. And I think that is more typically, something with like an ad-based business, where they are thinking about, active users on the platform matter a ton, because you're fueling it via advertising. We've started to talk more and more in the last couple of years about kind of some of those metrics as just, basically a measure of like how valuable is the platform, how sticky is the platform, and I think that's probably an underutilized measure. I get NPS. I think NPS is a very crude measure of what it is. We prefer to look at like, hey, are people actually in the platform using it, and use that as like a more consistent measure of like, are they finding value? What is their action say, in terms of where they're seeing value?
So when Phil was talking about Slack and like the number of messages sent as being kind of a true north growth measure for product-led marketing or product-led growth, like I can tell that there's maybe a little bit of a opinion that you may have. I want to root into that. And I guess my question here is, how would you approach something like product-led marketing from like a product measurement standpoint? Like a lot of people like to have that true north to be able to drive to, like, hey, I'll set my automation up to drive this action. And it's really clean. It's really easy story to tell internally. But as you've outlined here, the real growth story doesn't happen through a bunch of metrics. It happens through people doing things in your product and engaging with your brand and your product. So maybe walk us through how you would set up like a true north metric for a product like obviously Wistia or Slack.
Yeah. I think I think there's just like some amount of like acknowledging the imperfections of it. And so, we use OKRs here at Wistia a fair amount, not novel. But when we're doing that, we talk a lot about the objective being the thing that we're trying to do. So, we want to make Wistia the most beloved video software company. We want to make a real dent in the market share over this year, things like that. And then talk about the key results as being often imperfect measures of that thing that we're after. And saying like, we're going to look at them a lot. We're going to measure our performance based on that, but they're also imperfect. And so there's, they're like, we don't want to fully put the blinders on and say like, hey, just go optimize for this one thing. Kind of everyone in this business is adults. We can understand nuance and complication and say like, hey, here's what we're going after as an objective. Think about your work and whether it serves that objective. How we're going to measure progress is kind of these numbers. And honestly, also saying like, trying to be upfront about like, hey, how imperfect are some of these? Sometimes if we're trying to grow the business, we can invest more. Revenue is a pretty darn good measure of that. And then on the same time, we have brand OKRs, and we're trying to increase the perception of Wistia or the amount of word of mouth. And, organic search volume for the Wistia term is not a perfect measure for that, but it's okay. and just acknowledging like when each is the case, I think is pretty critical. So, I like true north things. Like simplicity is a value here at Wistia. I think it is like helpful to have some simplicity and kind of things that you're focused on. The one thing that we talk about is like on that front is simplicity, but not papering over a thing that we're like actually trying to balance. So we as a business are often talking about we're an independent business. We're talking about, hey, like the growth in customer number, in market share is very important to us, but also revenue and like growing a sustainable business is very important to us. And at time we've said, well, for simplicity, we're going to pick one of those things and say, that's what our focus is. And, having one focus is nice. But this year we were like, that's not true. We're actually trying to balance these two things. And so let's be honest with ourselves and be honest with the company and say, hey, these are the two things that we're trying to keep in balance. And we're prioritizing this one over this one, but that's how we're thinking about it. And I think there's something to be said for, I'm diverging from your question a bit, but like there's value in simplification. There's also downsides of oversimplifying to the point where you're not really representing kind of what the leaders of the company are thinking and feeling. Mm-hmm. And when it gets to that point, we say, well, let's say what we're thinking instead of trying to oversimplify and get to this nice, beautiful North Star metric.
I love that. I love the balance that you're pulling out there. It's easier said than done. You want that simplified North Star metric that the whole company can rally behind, but also speaking to the nuances behind that number and how it's not just one number. There's so many like metrics that are leading indicators to that number, and you're devaluing the work that maybe another team is doing that doesn't directly impact that number. So OKRs, North Star metrics, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but I like the transparency approach that you're pulling out there as an independent business. I think that's super important. Having been in BI, I guess like one question I have for you is like how big was the BI team when you like quote unquote left marketing but still were kind of marketing and went over into BI? How big was that team? How closely were you working with the data team. Like I think of my startup experience 12 years ago, and like there were no engineers that worked on data. Like marketers were stuck learning APIs and SQL scripts and trying to figure out how to get data into the tools that we care about. But I'm curious to ask you, like, how was that evolution of the data team at Wistia, and what role did you play in that?
Yeah, exactly. So there was no data team. That was kind of my transition from marketing to BI, was to start the data team. So it was a data team of me as we started. And then we grew that to a team of 3. There's 3 of us, and we often had an intern. And that was like the right size, just like, Wistia was probably 50, 75 people. So we started off, just really looking at where the biggest priorities were in the business, in terms of like where we were flying blind. The senior team obviously got like a lot of attention at the outset, and then quickly went towards like marketing, because marketing was didn't have a lot of visibility, had a lot of disparate systems, a lot of things that just kind of needed to be wrangled and simplified. Started out as a kind of team of 1. It was started out very scrappy. I was writing SQL, putting it into spreadsheets, sharing Google Sheets with people. And then as we hired kind of the second and third person, we kind of built out our BI infrastructure, built out the systems and tools to actually scale it. That was kind of the evolution of the team.
Very cool. Talk to us about that tech stack that activates the data for marketing and growth, and how that's evolved over time. I was looking at some of the code on this site, and I can see some Fivetran stuff going into the warehouse. We're big fans of Census, obviously sponsored the show, and then that's pushing data into your marketing automation tools. Like, curious about that journey on the tech stack side.
Yeah, we were pretty early on the Fivetran side. So we quickly went to a centralized data warehouse. So have kind of Redshift on the back end. Quickly went to, in the early days of forming that BI team, adopting Fivetran to just do the ETL, just get all the data from all of our different systems into one place. And then through mode analytics on top of that. So that was kind of the base of our BI infrastructure, probably for the first 3 or 4 years. Just kind of get everything into a data warehouse, throw a BI tool on top of it, be able to create dashboards, single source of truth, be able to look at reporting, and that kind of served us well for a while. And then you inevitably run into the next set of challenges where it's like, well, I want that same data in all the other tools. It took us a little while to find Census, but then found Census and said, okay, well, here's the missing ingredient here, which is now take all that stuff that the BI team owns and has organized in this data warehouse, has put kind of rules on top of that. So big shout out to DBT. We're early adopters of DBT, big fans of the platform and the team there. Which, just for folks that aren't in the data world, it's basically just a semantic layer, a way of kind of putting your business rules on the data. And so it helps you kind of organize your data, organize the different tables in a way that's kind of much easier to then consume kind of as an analytics platform or in other tools. Combining that and then using Census to then take all that data that's kind of BI has kind of organized and kind of put their stamp of approval on, and then send that out back into the tools. So back into HubSpot, back into Salesforce. And that continues to be our stack of today.
Very cool.
It works pretty well.
Awesome. I appreciate the detail there. It's not not totally surprising, but I guess like what I find interesting is that you almost went down the Redshift data warehouse centralized road pretty early on. Like I feel like a lot of companies, even back in the day, like a decade ago, were still on the train of debating what is that source of truth? Like where are we going to put all that data? And there was debates about the CRM being the source of truth or the marketing automation platform. And then you're connecting Mode or your BI tool through individual APIs, through all of the third-party tools that you're using. But you guys kind of like were ahead of the curve there and foreseen this idea of having the centralized data warehouse and Redshift kind of from the ground up. So I guess that saved you a lot of time several years down the road. But yeah, curious if you can share any details on that decision pretty early on.
Yeah, no, we were very happy about that decision. Kind of looking back, I think one of the key drivers for us was we realized that we wanted to own all the data, and so we looked at kind of other ways to approach it and realized that we were going to get potentially stuck in other tools, and either kind of from a pure just like pricing perspective, being like, hey, well, our database or this stuff is this size today and it could be 10x in the future and we want to have flexibility, or just like having the ability to move data around, do exactly what we want to do with it, was like a priority for us early on. And so that drove our decision to kind of have this central data warehouse that we had a lot more control of. Like, hey, we can see exactly what the data is. We can move it around exactly how we want. We're not held captive by other tools or platforms or by other schemas. So that was a big factor, kind of in our early choices. And then, yeah, we asked around a few folks kind of what their advice is for building this stuff out. And then we've since, both in the BI role and in growth, like to talk to other teams, just be like, hey, what are you doing? What does your tech stack look like? What are you struggling with? And that was one that we found very consistently. We were like, oh, we're so glad we're not in their shoes. And so I continue to do that as, again, the head of the growth team, try to get our growth teams talking to other teams, if nothing else, just to commiserate and realize that like the same shit that you're struggling with, everyone is struggling with. Nobody has figured this out. Other people have worse situations, worse setups. There's conflict with sales and marketing. And it's like, yeah, that's not unique. That everyone faces that. So that's
becomes a big therapy session.
Exactly.
I want to switch gears a little bit and ask some questions around growth marketing. So like when I was coming up in marketing in the early 2010s, growth hacking and growth marketing were so new. I remember everybody was like so in vogue of, all this quick shit that you could do to get your first 100 customers or 1,000 customers. But since then, we've seen like the product-led movement come out where I think there's a much more mature approach to growth teams. And, we're seeing this as like a multifaceted discipline like yourself, like you're integrating business intelligence and data along with your MarTech stack to achieve growth, and I'm sure also working with other folks within your organization. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what does growth look like at Wistia with like a more mature organization with more customers and, thinking about market share problems. And how does that contrast necessarily to even like a smaller startup in that early growth stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always hated the growth hacking word. What are we talking about? But yes, so I always prefer Scrappy over that. And I think there's plenty of room for Scrappy approaches, Scrappy tactics. We are more mature. We've been around for a while. We have solid customer base, solid revenue. And so I think we are at the place where like we talk about growth as like a portfolio approach, where we are doing some amount of optimization, and then some amount of kind of total exploration, big bets. And so I think, that is the right call, for where we are at. There's always room for optimization, and there's only so much upside to optimization. And so we are, looking at the journey of the website, looking at the purchase journey, and looking at, hey, how can we get a little bit more out of that? But also kind of what are the big opportunities that could be step changes for us, in terms of, acquiring a ton more customers, acquiring a ton more bigger businesses, things like that. And so I think that's where kind of some of the more mature kind of growth comes from. I think in the early stages, there's a version where it's like you're so scrappy that you are literally just trying to get the first few customers in the door, the first 20. We talked a lot about like, don't worry about how this thing scales. It's like, it's easy to get caught up in like, well, we could do this now, but what's going to happen once we, get the first 20? It's like, okay, we'll get the first 20 and then we'll worry about that problem. So I definitely would advocate that. I believe in that generally, as an approach. And then, there's like, we do things like pretty cross-functionally. We have a more mature like product design engineering org, more mature marketing org. It is kind of more important, though not critical, that like all of those things stay in sync. Again, we're only 200 people. We're not that big. But yeah, we make those efforts to make sure that we're like telling a consistent story, have a consistent brand voice. There's a little bit more of the coordination side. In a smaller company, coordination is just not as important. It's just not, there's not as many people to coordinate across. Mm-hmm. And, you're starting with nothing. And so like, don't go crazy on that front.
I haven't been at Wistia for as long as you have. Like, I'm sure on the growth side, there's been a wealth of memorable experiments and tests that you've ran. I'd love to hear maybe some of the successes that come to mind right away, but also the failures or maybe like some of the surprising outcomes.
Yeah, the failures are more interesting.
Okay.
There's we did an experiment. So as a video platform, we have this. I guess it's not that new now, but at the time we were introducing it, we were going to charge for bandwidth, and we realized that like this is a weird thing. Like how many gigabytes are consumed by video, customers will have no intuition about how many gigabytes they'll use or what they'll use or anything like that. And so kind of, we knew that we thought about different ways to present that. We kind of played with like a calculator to calculate it. And then, tried to translate it in the number of views per month and do all these things. And then we eventually ran a test. We had it and we had it just like not very prominent on the site of, there's some limits, but they're kind of buried. They weren't very prominent. And we were getting questions kind of in support about like, hey, what is this? Or complaints. So we said, okay, we're going to be like very customer centric. We're going to be as transparent as possible. So then we made the bandwidth this much bigger thing on the website. We put in this calculator. We tried to explain as much as we possibly could about how bandwidth works, what you would get charged for it. And the number of questions went through the roof. The conversion rates went way, way down. And it was just a disaster. And we were so sure. We all were like looking at this and it was like, oh, we got this awesome calculator. We got like all this Q&A. This is like good on us. We're like doing so right by the customer. And it just led to more confusion, more questions. And we went back and just buried it and raised some of the limits and said like, hey, we're going to try to like make this not be a thing that you have to worry about very much. But yeah, really did not go as we expected at all.
We've talked a little bit about like the difference between data informed versus data driven. And I think some of our listeners are probably feeling the way I feel, a little bit of a relief to hear somebody talk about data this way, right? Using data to inform your decisions, but not necessarily always being led by the nose. When you're talking about setting up these tests and A/B testing, how do you approach it at Wistia to test your bets in market? Like, what does the test, learn, experiment process kind of look like on your team?
Yeah, totally. I think step one is the most important, which is like, can we actually run this as an experiment and an A/B test? And like, everyone skips that step, and that's the single most important step there is. If you have 20 visitors a month to a page, you cannot run an A/B test for this. You just can't. So forget it. Like, make a call, decide what's best, run with it. And so there's a lot of parts of our website, a lot of parts of our flows. We cannot run A/B tests in any timely manner to get information. And so we don't. And then there's the homepage. Then there's some of the sign-up pages. And we happen to have a good amount of volume on our website. And so we can run some A/B tests, and we do. And we still try to test bigger items and start with, a strong hypothesis that, hey, we think people don't care about this part of the platform. We think, they are really coming with kind of several different problems in mind versus like one clear problem in mind. And then we kind of design a test and run that. And, I think that first step is critical. Having like a clear hypothesis and like saying kind of what you think is very important. The other important thing is for us, we also use some A/B tests when we think the differences might be just like pretty hard to measure. And so when we think, when we're not sure about kind of the size of the impact or the scale of the impact, we may run an A/B test and say, we're going to run it for like 2 weeks. We're not worried about statistical significance. We're not worried about those things. We just want to use this as a way to have a control. And so we've actually started to talk about that more as a business, which I think is a helpful framing. Instead of talking about A/B tests as a framing, talk more about having control groups. And so like, if we're going to make changes or do things, can we do it with a control group and measure the impact? Because that's what we're doing the whole time, right? Is we're trying to make changes to the website, the product, and we're trying to have an impact. And all we're doing is saying like, hey, is there a way we can take a control group and show what impact we're having? And I think that is like a healthier way to think about it, healthier way to say like, hey, yeah, we don't have enough concurrent traffic that we're going to do that, but we're going to use the past 3 months as our control group. And it's imperfect, but that's what we're doing. That's what we're able to do. And yeah, I think that has generally been our kind of approach to A/B testing. It's another tool that is at our disposal. It is not like some magical answer that solves all our problems.
Yeah, love the philosophy there. I guess the takeaway is not everything needs to be a test, especially not when you have 20 viewers on that landing page. And you should always start with that question of like, can we even run this as an A/B test before you go down the rabbit hole of like putting together your hypothesis and deciding what the minimal detectable effect is going to be. So yeah, great advice, Ezra. I feel like there's so many threads I would want to double down on and and pull from your brain and learn more from you. But this has flown by. We asked this question to all of our guests right at the end. You're a VP of marketing, a board advisor, a dog dad, a ski aficionado. You're also a Boston sports maniac. One question we ask all of our guests, like I said, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the things you're working on while staying happy?
Yeah, it's a very good question. For me, it's figuring out kind of what excites me and optimizing for that. Again, I think it is easy early in the career to be like, hey, this is all about like, how do I progress in my career? And that's kind of what you're optimizing for. Like, how do I get up to the next level and the next level and the next level? And I think at some point realizing that, that may be important. That's an important element, but what else drives you? And for me, that I think it's different for everyone. For me, it's all about kind of learning new things, and kind of, getting new knowledge, getting tested in new ways. And so that has been kind of the key to me thinking about my career and thinking about what I do next in my job. And is like, hey, is what I'm doing interesting? Am I learning a bunch? And if that's true, I'm going to keep doing it. If it's not true, maybe I need a new role within this company. Maybe I need a new role entirely. But I just go back to that question and kind of ask myself that, because then there's like that intrinsic motivation for doing my work and then finding balance outside of it, where work isn't the only thing. It's important to me, but spending time with my family, spending time skiing, also very important, and I prioritize those things too, and that's obviously pretty critical for me.
Awesome. Great answer. Simple question, but very powerful question to make sure you're finding that value in what you're doing. Ezra, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I think a lot of folks like me hopefully got a ton of value out of this. We'll link to all the stuff that Wistia is doing. I feel like you guys are coming out with new content, new video production series all the time. So thank you again for your time, Ezra. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.